The gun barrel pressed cold against 16-year-old Lila Benton's temple as she gripped the fountain pen, her hand trembling not from fear, but from the terrible weight of choice. Behind her, through the cabin's thin walls, came Jesse's rattling cough, each spasm weaker than the last. "Sign it." Reddick's voice cut like winter wind. No pleasantries, no false courtesy. Just the flat command of a man who'd done this before. The deed lay spread across their kitchen table, its elegant script promising $40 plus medicine in exchange for 160 acres of prime Kansas farmland. But it was the ink that made Lila's blood freeze the same distinctive blue-black she'd seen on the threatening letters that had arrived after other families refused to sell. Letters that always preceded the fever. Jesse's coughing fit echoed from the bedroom, followed by an ominous silence. Her heart stopped until his labored breathing resumed. In the lamplight, she could see Attorney Caldwell arranging papers, while Judge Morrison swayed drunkenly, his eyes vacant as a corpse's. 6 hours. Reddick checked his pocket watch with practiced ease. "That's what Doc Fleming gives your brother. Sign now, get the medicine. Wait." He shrugged. "Won't need the medicine." Lila pressed pen to paper, knowing with crystalline certainty that the moment her signature dried, she and Jesse would become loose ends. But as she formed the first letter of her name, gunshots shattered the prairie silence. 3 riders burst over the ridge, Cole Maddox in the lead, blood streaming from his shoulder, Black's men giving chase. His horse went down hard, throwing him into the dust 20 yards from the cabin. "Lila?" Maddox shouted over the gunfire. "Don't sign, Black's been poisoning." Reddick's shot cut him off the bullet, splintering wood inches from Maddox's head. But the interruption had given Lila the moment she needed to understand. The fever wasn't natural. It was murder. She grabbed the table edge and flipped it hard, sending papers flying as she dove for her father's rifle. Kansas Territory, in October 1867. The Homestead Act had promised 160 acres to any family brave enough to claim it, but nobody had warned them about men like Silas Black who made their own rules about who deserved to keep what they'd earned. The fever had taken families methodically over the past year. First the Hendersons, then the Patels, then Lila's own parents just 8 weeks ago. Always the same pattern: mysterious illness, desperate searches for medicine. And then Black's representatives arriving with generous offers that weren't offers at all. 3 hours earlier, Lila had been drawing water from their well when she'd noticed something that made her blood chill. A thin, oily film on the water's surface that hadn't been there the day before. The same film she'd seen at the Henderson place the week their children started getting sick. But Jesse was already showing symptoms: the weakness, the nausea, the gradual wasting that doctors called prairie fever. Without medicine, he'd follow their parents to the grave within days. With it, he might survive to see justice done. If justice was even possible against a man who owned judges and hired killers. "Miss Benton," Reddick had called out as the 3 riders approached his hand, resting casually on his gun. "Time to discuss your future." Attorney Caldwell dismounted with the careful movements of a man unaccustomed to honest work, producing legal documents with theatrical flourish. "Kansas Pacific Development Company is prepared to solve your financial difficulties. $40 cash plus expensive medicine from Kansas City, all for a simple signature." "To who?" Lila had kept her voice steady, though her knuckles were white on the rifle stock. "Progress, Miss Benton. The march of civilization." Caldwell's smile was as polished as his lie. But Lila had grown up on this land, knew every family for 50 miles. She'd seen the pattern Black's people didn't think she was smart enough to notice. Families who refused to sell got sick. Families who sold quickly often recovered, disappearing into the vast prairie with suspicious haste. Now Cole Maddox lay bleeding in her yard, and the man who'd been investigating suspicious deaths across 3 counties. The man who'd figured out what she was only beginning to suspect. "The medicine's real," Reddick said as gunfire erupted around them. Question is whether you're smart enough to take it while there's still time. Through the cabin window, Jesse's pale face pressed against the glass, his fever-bright eyes taking in the violence outside. For weeks, she'd been giving him water from a poisoned well, unknowingly feeding him the same substance that had killed their parents. The guilt would have crushed her if the rage hadn't burned it away first. The room erupted in chaos as Lila dove behind the overturned table legal papers, scattering like leaves in a prairie wind. Attorney Caldwell scrambled backward with curses that would have made his Boston clients blush, while Judge Morrison toppled from his chair like a sack of grain. Kill them both. Reddick's voice carried over the gunfire as his men spread out to surround the cabin. Make it look like they shot each other. Cole Maddox had found cover behind the water trough, but Lila could see the spreading bloodstain on his shirt. He was hurt bad, losing strength with every heartbeat. The evidence, Cole shouted as bullets whined overhead. Hidden at my ranch, ledgers, receipts, chemical orders, get it to the territorial marshal. First, we get out of here alive. Lila called back, working the lever on her father's sharps. She'd learned to shoot defending their claim from raiders, but she'd never killed a man. Tonight might change that. Jesse appeared in the doorway behind her, clutching their old Navy revolver despite his illness. What do you need me to do? Looking at her brother's determined face, Lila realized something crucial. The poison hadn't just been making him sick. It had been stealing his spirit, his strength, his will to fight. Now, with the truth revealed and adrenaline flooding his system, he looked more like the boy who'd helped their father drive off claim jumpers. Can you ride? Better than I can wait here for them to burn us out. Thunder rumbled overhead as the storm that had been building all day finally broke. Rain began falling in heavy drops that would turn the dust to mud and make accurate shooting nearly impossible. Back window, Lila decided. We take Cole and make for his ranch. Whatever evidence he's got, it's our only chance to stop Black. What about the medicine? Jesse nodded toward the bottle Reddick had dropped when the shooting started. Lila looked at the clear liquid gleaming in the lamplight, then at the legal documents scattered across the floor. Papers signed with the same blue-black ink that had marked their family for death. We don't need their medicine anymore. She grabbed her brother's arm. Jesse, that wasn't medicine. It was more poison, just a different kind. They've been controlling the dose, keeping you sick but not dead, making sure I'd be desperate enough to sign anything. The truth hit him like a physical blow. The water, our well, poisoned, has been for weeks, maybe months. She helped him boost Cole through the back window. But you're getting stronger already just being away from it. They struggled to get Cole onto his horse, the rancher barely conscious from blood loss. Behind them, orange light flickered against the cabin windows as someone set their home ablaze. I won't make it. Cole gasped as they helped him into the saddle. Too much blood. But the evidence behind the fireplace. You'll make it, Lila said firmly, though she could see the truth in his gray complexion. We all will. But as they rode hard into the storm, leaving everything their parents had built burning behind them, she wondered if survival was even possible against an enemy who poisoned wells and owned judges. The only thing she knew for certain was that Jesse was already breathing easier with every mile they put between themselves and the tainted water. And that was worth dying for, if necessary. The storm lashed them with increasing fury as they rode northwest toward Cole's ranch. The prairie transformed into a treacherous maze of slick grass and hidden gullies. Lightning revealed their surroundings in stark snapshots, endless grassland broken by rocky outcroppings where ambushers could hide. Can't keep this pace. Cole gasped, blood dripping steadily from his stirrup. Horse won't make it. Jesse, despite weeks of poisoning, was showing remarkable improvement with every hour away from the contaminated well. His color was better, his breathing stronger. How far to your place? 4 miles, maybe 5. Cole's voice was fading. but they'll follow. Reddick won't let us reach. A muzzle flash in the darkness behind them confirmed his words. They were being pursued, and in Cole's condition, they'd never outrun mounted men on fresh horses. There, Jesse pointed to a narrow gap between two rocky ridges. We can lose them in the rocks. They guided their horses into the stone maze water, streaming off the boulders like waterfalls. The gap opened into a small valley, sheltered from the worst of the storm, with a clear stream running down its center. Jesse slid from his horse and drank deeply from the stream, his face transforming as clean water washed the poison's taste from his mouth. God, I'd forgotten what it felt like not to be thirsty all the time. Cole collapsed against a boulder, his shirt soaked with blood. Listen, both of you. Evidence is behind the stone fireplace, ledgers showing chemical purchases, shipping records, enough to hang Black and his whole organization. What kind of poison? Lila bound his wounds with strips torn from her shirt, her mother's medical training guiding her hands. Arsenic compound. Dissolves completely, no taste or smell. Small doses cause fever symptoms, weakness, organ failure. Perfect for what Black needed. Cole coughed, blood flecking his lips. Been using it across 3 counties. Dr. Fleming never suspected. Fleming's looking for natural causes. Who'd suspect systematic poisoning in the middle of nowhere? Cole's smile was bitter. That's what made it so perfect. Thunder crashed overhead, close enough to shake the ground. In the lightning flash that followed, Lila saw riders silhouetted against the ridge above them, 4 men picking their way down the slope. Found us, Jesse whispered, checking his revolver. Lila studied their position with her father's tactical eye. The valley was a trap, but it was also a fortress, if used correctly. Jesse, take the horses up to that shelf. Keep them quiet. What are you planning? To even the odds. She checked her rifle one final time. There's a way out through the North Rocks. If I can get behind them while you keep them busy. That's suicide. So is sitting here waiting for them to pick us off, met her brother's eyes. 10 minutes. Make noise, make them think we're all here. I'll come at them from the side. Cole gripped her wrist with surprising strength. If something happens to me, promise you'll get that evidence to the law. Nothing's going to happen. We're all going home. She slipped away into the storm, leaving behind the 2 most important people in her world to face professional killers with nothing but her father's rifle and the fury of someone who'd lost too much already. The rocks were treacherous in the rain, but Lila had grown up scrambling over Kansas stone formations. She worked her way up the valley's north wall, using lightning flashes to navigate between boulders and crevices. Below, Cole's rifle cracked once, twice. Return fire sparkled from multiple positions. They had the valley surrounded, but they'd made a crucial error. Focused on the narrow entrance, they'd left their rear exposed. Lila reached the rim just as another lightning flash revealed the attackers' positions. 4 men spread out along the ridge, silhouetted against the storm clouds. She'd never aimed at a human being before. But these men had murdered her parents, poisoned her brother, burned her home. Her father's sharps bucked against her shoulder, and one of the riders pitched forward with a scream that cut through the thunder. Behind us, someone shouted, on the ridge. Now they knew she was there, but she'd accomplished what she'd set out to do. Below in the valley, Cole and Jesse were picking off the remaining attackers with careful aimed shots. The fight was over in minutes. When the echoes faded, 4 of Black's men lay dead in the mud and rain. Lila. Jesse's voice called from below. You hurt? Still breathing. She worked her way back down, legs shaking with reaction. She'd killed a man tonight, ended a life with the squeeze of a trigger. She expected to feel guilt, but all she felt was grim satisfaction. They'd tried to murder her family. Now one of them would never try to murder anyone again. But Cole was unconscious when she reached the valley floor, his breathing shallow and his pulse barely detectable. Without medical attention soon, he wouldn't survive to see his evidence presented in court. And they were still 20 miles from help through country crawling with Black's men. Cole remained unconscious as they struggled to get him back in the saddle, his body limp as a rag doll. Jesse had to ride beside him, one hand on the reins and the other keeping Cole upright, while Lila scouted ahead for signs of pursuit. "He's burning up with fever," Jesse reported during one of their brief stops. "Needs a doctor soon or he'll make it." But Lila could see the truth in Cole's gray complexion and labored breathing. The man who held the key to Black's destruction was dying, and they were hours away from help. They pushed deeper into the broken country north of Cole's ranch, following game trails and dry creek beds that would hide their passage from casual observation. The storm was breaking stars, showing through gaps in the racing clouds, but that meant both better visibility and higher risk of being spotted. "Riders," Jesse whispered, pointing toward distant lights moving across the prairie. "Coming from the east?" Lila counted the lights, at least 6, maybe 8 men, searching in a coordinated pattern. They'd found the bodies at the valley, figured out which direction their quarry had fled. "They're between us and Cole's ranch," she realized. "We'll have to circle around, come at it from the north." That adds 3 hours to the ride. Cole doesn't have 3 hours. As if summoned by Jesse's words, Cole stirred in his saddle, his eyes focusing on Lila with desperate intensity. "Map," he whispered. "Your father gave me a map." "On what map?" Lila leaned closer, straining to hear over the wind. "Wells. Poisoned wells. Locations marked." Cole's voice was getting weaker. "Hidden in your cabin, before he died. Knew something was wrong." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her father had suspected the poisoning before his death, had been trying to document the pattern. That's why Black's men had been so eager to burn their cabin, not just to destroy evidence, but to eliminate proof that someone had been tracking their activities. "Where in the cabin?" "Root cellar, behind the preserving jars." Cole's eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward again. But their cabin was ashes now, everything reduced to charred timber and smoke. Even if her father's map had survived the fire retrieving, it would mean riding back through country swarming with Black's men. "We keep going," Lila decided. "Get to Cole's ranch, get his evidence. Worry about Pa's map later." They rode hard for another hour, circling wide around the search parties. Cole regained consciousness twice more, each time long enough to give them crucial details about his hidden documentation. Chemical suppliers in Kansas City. Shipping manifests showing arsenic deliveries. A complete list of target families with planned death dates. "There's more," he gasped during his final lucid moment. "Land speculation? Eastern syndicates. Blacks selling stolen homesteads for 10 times what the railroad pays." The scope of it staggered Lila. This wasn't just about clearing railroad right-of-way, it was about creating the biggest land grab in territorial history. Her parents had died as part of a conspiracy that reached back to financial powers in New York and Boston. But Cole was unconscious again, and they were still miles from his ranch, with Black's men closing in from multiple directions. "There." Jesse pointed ahead to where lamplight flickered in the windows of a low stone building. "That's gotta be it." Cole's ranch house sat in a natural bowl surrounded by low hills, its thick stone walls built more like a fortress than a home. Smoke rose from the chimney, and horses moved restlessly in the corral signs of recent occupation. "Too easy," Lila muttered, studying the layout through her father's old spyglass. "No guards visible, but that doesn't mean they're not there. Could be a trap. Or Cole's foreman is still holding the place." She counted windows, calculated angles of approach. "Either way, we need what's behind that fireplace." They left their horses in a draw a quarter-mile from the house and approached on foot using the broken terrain to mask their movement. The closer they got, the more obvious it became that something was wrong. The corral gate stood open. No smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. And when the wind shifted, Lila caught the unmistakable smell of death. "Someone got here first," Jesse whispered. "They found Cole's foreman in the barn, shot once through the back of the head. Professional work, quick and clean. Black's men had been here, searched the place, probably found nothing. Because they'd been looking in the wrong place." The main house showed signs of hasty searching: furniture, overturned drawers, pulled-out papers scattered. But the stone fireplace looked undisturbed, its heavy mantelpiece still in place. Lila found the loose stone exactly where Cole had described it, behind the fireplace, where the heat would have discouraged casual inspection. The hidden cavity contained leather-wrapped bundles of documents, small bottles of clear liquid, and a thick ledger bound in black leather. "Oh my God," Jesse breathed, reading over her shoulder. He documented everything: purchase orders, shipping routes, target families. But as Lila lifted the ledger from its hiding place, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway behind them. "I was wondering when you'd show up here." Dr. Martha Fleming stood in the entrance, her medical bag in one hand and a derringer in the other. She looked older than her years, exhausted by whatever game she'd been playing. But her eyes held the steady focus of someone who'd made peace with difficult choices. "Dr. Fleming." Lila kept her voice level, though her heart was hammering. "I thought you were in Cottonwood Creek." "I was, until word reached me that Cole Maddox had been shot and was talking about evidence." Fleming stepped into the room, her gun trained on Lila's chest. "I've spent the last 6 hours riding hard to clean up this mess." Jesse moved protectively closer to his sister, his hand dropping toward his revolver. "What mess?" "The mess you children have made of a perfectly orchestrated operation." Fleming's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been living a lie for too long. "Do you have any idea how many people will die? If that railroad doesn't go through, how many jobs will be lost?" "You're talking about murder." Lila shifted slightly, trying to get closer to her rifle where she'd propped it against the mantelpiece. "Cold-blooded murder of entire families. I'm talking about progress." Fleming's gun never wavered. 50 families against thousands of jobs. Temporary suffering against permanent prosperity. "Temporary suffering." Jesse's voice cracked with disbelief. "You killed our parents." I eased their passing. For the first time, Fleming looked genuinely remorseful. "The compound I recommended was quick, relatively painless. Without my guidance, Black would have used methods far more brutal." The casual way she discussed their parents' deaths as a medical procedure made Lila's blood boil. But she needed Fleming talking distracted if she was going to reach her rifle. "So you chose poison over bullets. How merciful of you." "Don't mock what you don't understand, child." Fleming's voice hardened. "When Black first approached me, I was facing bankruptcy. My late husband's debts, a failing practice in a territory where people can barely afford food, let alone medical care. So you decided to help kill them instead of heal them. I decided to prevent something much worse." Fleming gestured with her free hand toward the scattered documents. "Do you know what Black's original plan was? Hire gun thugs to drive families off their land through terror and violence? Burning, beating, worse things to women and children. And you convinced him poison was better. I convinced him it was cleaner, quieter, less likely to attract federal attention." Fleming's voice took on a defensive note. "I saved lives by making deaths less brutal. You became a killer who thought she was a saint. I became a doctor who made an impossible choice and tried to minimize the damage." Fleming moved closer, the derringer steady in her practiced grip. "But you wouldn't understand. You're just children playing at being heroes." Lila looked into the older woman's eyes and saw something more terrifying than simple evil. She saw someone who had convinced herself that murder was mercy, that collaboration was compassion, that lies were truth. Dr. Fleming wasn't just a killer, she was a killer who genuinely believed she was saving people by helping to destroy them. "The medicine you gave Jesse, Lila said quietly. What was it really? A different compound, designed to counteract the arsenic while maintaining the appearance of illness. Fleming's expression softened slightly. I was trying to keep him alive without compromising the operation. By experimenting on my brother, by balancing competing obligations. I owed Black my cooperation, but I'm not a monster. Fleming raised the derringer. Now give me those documents, and I'll make sure you both have enough money to start over somewhere else. Like you made sure all the other families had a chance to start over. This is your last warning. Lila met Fleming's eyes and saw the exact moment when negotiation ended and execution began. The doctor's finger tightened on the trigger just as Lila dove for her rifle. The derringer's crack was deafening in the stone room, but the small caliber bullet went wide as Jessie tackled Fleming from the side. They struggled for the gun as Lila rolled to her feet, her father's sharps coming up to her shoulder. Stop! Fleming broke free from Jessie, the derringer back in her hand, but now pointed at the boy's head. Drop the rifle, or I kill him where he stands. Do it, Jessie said calmly. She's going to kill us anyway. At least this way you can get the evidence to the law. Fleming's hand shook slightly. I don't want to kill children. I never wanted any of this. But Black made it clear if I didn't help him, he'd find someone else. Someone without my scruples about suffering. So you chose to become him instead of standing up to him. I chose to save what lives I could while fulfilling my obligations. Fleming's voice cracked with strain. You have to understand, I tried to make their deaths merciful. That has to count for something. It counts for nothing. Lila's rifle never wavered from Fleming's chest. You took an oath to do no harm. You violated it in the worst possible way. Sometimes doing no harm means choosing the lesser evil. Sometimes it means having the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. Fleming's face crumpled as the weight of her choices finally broke through the justifications she'd built around them. I was weak. I was frightened. I thought I could control it, minimize the damage, and instead you became part of it. Yes. The word came out as a whisper. God help me, yes. The derringer wavered in Fleming's hand as her composure finally shattered. In that moment of vulnerability, Jessie stepped out of the line of fire, leaving Fleming standing alone with her guilt and her gun. I can't undo what I've done, she said, tears streaming down her face. But I can keep you from sharing my fate. The derringer's second barrel cracked as Fleming turned the gun on herself. Dr. Fleming's body lay crumpled against the stone wall, her medical bag spilling its contents across the floor. Among the scattered instruments and bottles, Lila found vials of clear liquid, labeled with chemical names. She didn't recognize the tools of systematic murder, disguised as healing. She was trying to save people by killing them. Jessie said quietly, staring at the woman who had been both their family's doctor and their family's destroyer. How does someone get so lost? By telling themselves lies until they believe them. Lila gathered the scattered documents, checking each one against Cole's ledger. By choosing the easy path and calling it the moral one. But they had no time for philosophical reflection. Fleming's gunshots would have carried for miles, alerting Black search parties to their location. They needed to move fast if they were going to escape with the evidence. Where do we take it? Jessie asked, shouldering Cole's leather satchel. Fleming was right about one thing: Black owns half the judges in Kansas. Cole mentioned territorial marshals, federal jurisdiction outside Black's control. Lila checked her ammunition, 3 rounds left in the sharps, maybe 4 in Jessie's revolver. But first, we need to survive long enough to reach them. The sound of approaching horses answered any questions about immediate priorities. Through the window, Lila could see riders converging on the ranch from 3 directions. at least a dozen men moving with the coordinated precision of military veterans. "Back door," Jesse said, but even as he spoke, they could hear voices from that direction as well. Black's men had learned from previous encounters surrounding the building before announcing their presence. "We're trapped." Lila looked around the stone room, calculating angles and distances. The windows were too narrow for escape, the walls too thick to break through. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the assault began. "I'm not trapped," Jesse said suddenly, pointing toward the fireplace. "Hidden." The chimney was wide enough for a slender person to climb, built in the old style with handholds carved into the stone. It would be a desperate gamble. They'd be completely exposed if anyone thought to look up, but it might be their only chance. "Can you make it with that satchel?" "Try and stop me." Jesse was already climbing the heavy bag slung across his shoulders. Lila followed, her rifle strapped to her back, trying not to think about what would happen if the chimney narrowed or if soot loosened their grip. Behind them, voices grew louder as Black's men approached the house. They reached the roof just as the front door splintered under the impact of rifle butts. The ranch house sat in a bowl surrounded by low hills, but there was a dry creek bed that ran north toward the main trail if they could reach it without being seen. "Now," Lila whispered, and they slid down the back slope of the roof, dropping into the darkness beyond the reach of the lamplight spilling from the windows. Behind them, they could hear Black's men searching the house, their frustration growing as they found Fleming's body, but no sign of their primary targets. Shouts and curses echoed in the night as they realized their quarry had escaped again. But escape was temporary at best. They were on foot in hostile territory, carrying evidence that could destroy Black's empire, but with no way to deliver it safely. Every lawman for 50 miles was either bought or intimidated, and federal authorities were days away. "There," Jesse pointed toward a ridge to the east, where a signal fire blazed against the night sky. "That's not one of Black's men." As they watched, an answering fire appeared on a distant hill, then another forming a chain of lights across the prairie. Someone was coordinating a response to the night's violence, rallying forces that Black didn't control. Who? Lila wondered aloud. Their answer came in the form of a lone rider approaching from the direction of the signal fires. As he drew closer, they could see the glint of metal on his chest. Not a sheriff's star, but the distinctive badge of a federal marshal. "Deputy Marshal James Patterson," the rider called out as he reined in beside their hiding place. "I'm looking for Lila and Jesse Benton. Are they still alive?" "Depends who's asking." Lila replied, her rifle trained on the newcomer despite his badge. "Someone who's been tracking Black's operation for the past 3 months." Patterson dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Someone who knows about the poisoned wells, the murdered families, and the railroad land grab." "How do we know you're legitimate?" "Because I've got federal warrants for Black Reddick and half a dozen others. Because I've been working with Cole Maddox to gather evidence. And because if I was one of Black's men, you'd already be dead." Patterson's logic was sound, but Lila had learned not to trust anyone too quickly. "Prove it." The marshal reached into his shirt pocket and produced a folded paper, holding it where they could see the official seals and signatures. A federal warrant for Silas Black's arrest on charges of conspiracy murder and mail fraud. Cole sent word 3 weeks ago that he was close to breaking the case wide open. Patterson explained. "I've been coordinating with territorial authorities, building a task force. When reports came in about gun battles and burning buildings, we knew it was time to move." "Where's your task force now?" "Surrounding Black's main stronghold in Hayes City. But we need that evidence Cole was hiding. Without it, Black might slip through legal loopholes." Jesse stepped out of the shadows, Cole's satchel in his hands. "Will this do?" Patterson's eyes widened as he examined the documents by moonlight. Ledgers, chemical receipts, shipping manifests, correspondence, everything needed to prove systematic murder for profit. "Now this is more than we hoped for," he breathed. With this evidence, we can arrest every man in Black's organization. What about the families who were murdered? What happens to their land? Full investigation, federal court proceedings, restitution where possible. Patterson's expression was grim. Won't bring back the dead, but it'll ensure justice is served. As dawn broke over the Kansas prairie, they rode toward Hays City with an escort of federal marshals carrying evidence that would destroy the most powerful criminal conspiracy in territorial history. Behind them, smoke still rose from the ruins of Lila's childhood home, but ahead lay the promise of justice finally served. But Silas Black was a man with resources and connections. Even with overwhelming evidence against him, he wouldn't surrender without a fight. And that fight would determine whether justice or corruption ruled the Kansas frontier. Hays City at dawn looked like a town under siege. Federal marshals occupied strategic positions around Black's hotel while territorial cavalry blocked the main roads. But the real battle would be fought in the hotel's top-floor suite, where Silas Black had barricaded himself with his remaining loyal men. He's got maybe 6 gunmen left, Marshal Patterson reported as they approached the perimeter. Professional killers, but outnumbered 3-1. Problem is, he's also got hostages. What kind of hostages? Lila asked, though she suspected she already knew. Town officials. The mayor, the bank president, a federal judge who was visiting on business. Patterson's face was grim. Blacks demanding safe passage to Mexico in exchange for their lives. You can't let him escape. Can't let innocent people die either. Patterson studied the hotel through his spyglass. We need a way to get those hostages out before we make our move. Jesse had been studying the building's layout, his young mind working through tactical possibilities. What about the roof? If someone could get up there, maybe create a distraction while the marshals rushed the stairs. Too dangerous. Black's men would cut down anyone trying to climb up there. Not if they were looking the wrong way. Lila was forming a plan, desperate, probably suicidal, but potentially their only chance to end this without more innocent deaths. What if Black thought the real threat was coming from the street? All his attention focused on the main assault while someone slipped in from above. You're talking about a coordinated attack. Perfect timing, no room for error. Patterson shook his head. One mistake and everyone dies. Then we don't make mistakes. As they finalized their plan, a new complication emerged. Reddick appeared at one of the hotel's upper windows, a white flag in one hand and a gun to the head of the captured judge in the other. Federal boys. His voice carried clearly across the street. Boss wants to parlay, send someone up to talk terms. It's a trap, Jesse said immediately. Of course it's a trap. Lila checked her rifle one final time. But it's also an opportunity. While they're focused on negotiations, we make our move. Patterson looked at the brother and sister, who had already proven themselves against impossible odds. Then at the hotel where Black held innocent lives hostage. The mathematics of frontier justice were stark. Sometimes good people had to risk everything to stop evil from triumphing. All right, he decided. But we do this my way. Military precision, no heroics. The assault began exactly at noon when the sun would be in the defenders' eyes. Patterson approached the hotel's front entrance under a flag of truce, while Lila worked her way around to the building's rear. Jesse remained with the marshal's sharpshooters ready to provide covering fire. But as Lila reached the hotel's back wall, she discovered they weren't the only ones with a plan. Dr. Fleming stepped out of the shadows, very much alive, despite the bullet wound in her shoulder. Her derringer was trained on Lila's chest, and her eyes held the cold determination of someone who'd made a final choice. Surprised. Fleming's smile was bitter as winter moonlight. You always were too quick to assume death, child. I saw you fall. You saw me collapse from shock and blood loss. There's a difference. Fleming gestured toward her bandaged shoulder. Painful, inconvenient, but hardly fatal when you know how to treat gunshot wounds. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Lila had felt genuine sympathy for Fleming's apparent suicide, had even respected the woman's final gesture of self-destruction rather than surrender. Why? Lila kept her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. Why help Black now when you seemed ready to end it? Because I realized something while lying there bleeding. Fleming's voice was steady, professional. I can't undo what I've done, but I can still control how it ends. Black's offering me safe passage to California, a new practice, a chance to start over. Built on the graves of the families you helped murder. Built on practical necessity. Fleming stepped closer, forcing Lila back against the hotel wall. I'm 47 years old, a woman alone in a territory that eats the weak. Black's money is my only chance at survival. You could testify against him, help bring justice. Justice. Fleming's laugh was hollow. Child, there's no justice for someone like me. Only the choice between dying here or living somewhere else. As Fleming spoke, Lila became aware of sounds from inside the hotel, raised voices, the crash of overturned furniture, a single gunshot followed by shouting. Patterson's negotiation had turned violent. Sounds like your federal friends are having difficulties, Fleming observed. Black's not the surrendering type. Neither am I. Lila dove sideways, just as Fleming pulled the trigger, the Derringer's bullet scoring her shoulder instead of her heart. She rolled, came up running, and sprinted for the hotel's rear entrance as Fleming cursed and tried to reload. The hotel's back door was unlocked. Black's men were all focused on the threat from the street. Lila slipped inside her rifle ready and began working her way toward the stairs. The lobby was chaos. Patterson and two other marshals had taken cover behind overturned furniture, while Black's men fired down from the mezzanine level. The federal negotiation had been a feint designed to get lawmen inside the building, but it had turned into a pitched battle with innocent lives hanging in the balance. Lila. Patterson shouted over the gunfire. Get out of here, this whole place is about to come down. But she was already moving, using the confusion to slip past the main battle and reach the service stairs that led to the upper floors. Behind her, Fleming burst through the rear door, her reloaded Derringer seeking targets. The hotel's top floor was eerily quiet compared to the battle raging below. Black had withdrawn to his suite with the hostages, leaving his men to hold the stairs. But Lila knew buildings like this one. Her father had worked construction before becoming a farmer, and he'd taught her to read architectural weaknesses. The suite's windows faced the street, giving Black a clear view of the marshal's positions. But there was a maintenance ladder built into the wall between floors, invisible from the street but accessible from the hallway. She climbed quickly, her rifle slung across her back, trying not to think about the drop below or the bullets that would fill the air if she was spotted. The ladder brought her to a narrow ledge outside Black's windows, close enough to see inside, close enough to act. Through the glass, she could see Silas Black himself for the first time, a distinguished man in an expensive suit, his silver hair and cultured manner making him look more like a senator than a mass murderer. He stood behind a mahogany desk, a revolver in his hand, while his hostages knelt on the floor nearby. Federal warrants mean nothing without federal jurisdiction, Black was saying into a speaking trumpet that carried his voice to the street below. I'm prepared to negotiate, but only from a position of strength. Reddick stood beside him, rifle trained on the hostages, his scarred face showing the strain of their desperate situation. Boss, we can't hold them forever. Maybe it's time to consider their terms. My terms are simple, Black replied. Safe passage to the Mexican border plus $50,000 in territorial bonds. In return, these good people live to see another sunset. And if we refuse, then Kansas loses some of its most prominent citizens, and the responsibility falls on federal interference with legitimate business operations. Even facing capture and execution, Black was still spinning the narrative, still trying to position himself as a victim of government overreach, rather than a perpetrator of mass murder. But Lila had heard enough. The window was latched from the inside, but her father's construction work had taught her that hotel windows were notoriously flimsy. A single sharp blow in the right place. Glass exploded inward as she smashed through the window with her rifle butt rolling across the floor and coming up with the sharps trained on Black's chest. "Step away from the hostages," she ordered, her voice cutting through the sudden silence. Black's eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed with calculation. "Miss Lila Benton, I presume. You've caused me considerable inconvenience." "Good, I'm just getting started." Reddick swung his rifle toward her, but Jesse's voice called out from the broken window. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Her brother had followed her up the ladder, his revolver trained on Reddick's head. Behind him, Marshal Patterson's men were flooding the hallway as the street battle ended with Black's remaining defenders dead or captured. "It's over, Black," Patterson announced, bursting through the suite door with federal marshals flanking him. "Surrender now, and you'll live to stand trial." But Black wasn't finished. With the smooth motion of a man accustomed to desperate situations, he grabbed the nearest hostage, the federal judge, and pressed his gun to the man's temple. "I think not, Marshal. You see, I still have something you need alive." Black's cultured voice never wavered, even with capture staring him in the face. "My terms remain the same. Safe passage and $50,000, or this distinguished jurist dies." "You're outnumbered 6-1, Patterson pointed out, "but I only need to kill one man to make my point." Black's finger tightened on the trigger. "The choice is yours, gentlemen. Justice or mercy. You can't have both." The standoff stretched taut as Wire's 6 federal guns trained on Black, while he held a judge's life in his hands. In the silence, Lila could hear her own heartbeat, the distant sound of the crowd gathering in the street below, the tick of the ornate clock on Black's desk. Then Dr. Fleming appeared in the doorway behind the marshals, her derringer steady despite her wounded shoulder. "Enough," she said quietly. "This ends now." Fleming's derringer cracked twice in rapid succession, but not at the federal marshals. The first bullet took Reddick in the chest, dropping him before he could swing his rifle toward the hostages. The second shattered Black's gun hand, sending his revolver spinning across the floor. "You treacherous witch," Black screamed, clutching his bloody hand. "We had an agreement." "I had an agreement with the devil," Fleming replied, slumping against the doorframe as blood loss finally caught up with her. "But even the devil deserves to burn in hell." The federal marshals moved swiftly, securing Black and his wounded enforcer, while Patterson checked on the hostages. The judge was shaken, but unharmed, the mayor and bank president, emerging from their ordeal with nothing worse than frayed nerves. "Why?" Lila asked Fleming as the older woman sank into a chair, her face pale as parchment. "Why turn on him at the end?" "Because I saw myself in his eyes when he was ready to kill that judge." Fleming's voice was barely a whisper. The same cold calculation, the same willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain. I couldn't become that completely." "You're still going to hang for what you did." "Yes, but at least I'll hang for something other than pure evil." Fleming managed a weak smile. "Sometimes the only redemption available is choosing how you face the consequences." Dr. Martha Fleming died in that hotel room, her final breath carrying what might have been the first honest words she'd spoken in months. Not a hero's death, but not a villain's, either just the complex ending of a woman who lost her way and found it again too late to matter. Black was taken into custody, his wounded hand bandaged, and his wrists shackled with iron cuffs that would hold him until his trial. Even in defeat, he maintained his dignity, walking to the marshal's wagon with his head high and his expensive suit immaculate. "This isn't over," he told Lila as they loaded him into the transport. "I have resources, connections, appeals courts. Justice moves slowly, Miss Benton, and I'm a patient man." "So am I," she replied. And I've got something you don't have. What's that? The truth, and people who'll fight for it. Reddick survived his wounds, but not his conscience. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the certainty of execution, he agreed to testify against Black's entire organization in exchange for life imprisonment. His confession filled in the gaps that Cole's documentation had left, providing names, dates, and methods that would ensure no one involved in the conspiracy escaped justice. The trials took place in federal court in Kansas City, drawing spectators from across the territory. Lila and Jesse testified for 3 days, laying out the systematic poisoning that had claimed their parents and dozens of other families. Their words backed by Cole's evidence, and Reddick's confession painted a picture of corruption so vast it shocked even hardened federal prosecutors. Silas Black was convicted on 17 counts of murder and sentenced to hang. His execution, carried out on a cold November morning, was witnessed by survivors from across 3 counties, people who had lost everything to his greed, but had lived to see justice served. The railroad land grab collapsed overnight as federal investigators seized Black's assets and voided hundreds of fraudulent land transfers. The Eastern Syndicate that had backed his operation dissolved under congressional scrutiny, its members fleeing to Europe or disappearing into the anonymity of big city life. 6 months later, Lila stood on the porch of the new house she and Jesse had built on their original homestead, watching the sun set over a community that was finally beginning to heal. The poisoned wells had been cleaned, and tested new families had moved in to replace those who had been murdered. And a real doctor, one carefully vetted by territorial medical authorities, had opened a practice in town. Cole Maddox had recovered fully from his wounds and used his restored health to help other families reclaim stolen land. Jesse, now 15 and strong from clean water and honest work, had been accepted into a program that would train him as a territorial marshal when he came of age. "Penny for your thoughts," James Patterson said, settling into the chair beside her. His deputy's badge had been replaced by a full marshal's star after his role in bringing down Black's conspiracy earned recognition from federal authorities. "Just thinking about how much has changed." Lila gestured toward the valley where lights flickered in the windows of rebuilt homes. "A year ago, this place was dying. Now it's more alive than ever. Because good people refuse to let evil win. And because we learned to stand together instead of fighting alone." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the evening sounds of a community at peace. In the distance, church bells rang the hour, and children's laughter carried on the prairie wind. Normal sounds taken for granted until they're threatened. "Lila," James said quietly, "I've been thinking about something. About building something permanent." She looked at him, seeing the question in his eyes before he asked it. "I know we've been through hell these past months. I know you've got every reason to be cautious about trusting people." He took her hands in his calloused from honest work. "But I'd like to build a life with you. Here in Kansas, where we can help make sure nothing like Black's conspiracy ever happens again." "Are you asking me to marry you, James Patterson?" "I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense of the word. Not just as a wife, but as someone who understands that justice requires constant vigilance." "Yes," she said, the word coming easier than she'd expected. "Yes, I'll marry you." As they sat together on the porch they'd built with their own hands, Lila felt something she hadn't experienced since before the fever came to Cottonwood Creek: complete peace. The land was clean, the community was strong, and the future held promise instead of fear. But their moment of tranquility was interrupted by the approach of a lone rider. His horse lathered from hard travel. As he drew closer, they could see the dust of long miles on his clothes and the urgency in his posture. "Marshal Patterson," the rider called out, dismounting with quick, nervous movements. "Tom Bradley from the Kansas City Star. I've got news about the Black investigation." "What kind of news?" James stood, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. "We found more. A lot more." Bradley pulled out a leather portfolio, his hands shaking with excitement or fear. Black's operation was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There's evidence of similar conspiracies in Colorado, Montana, even California. Land speculation on a scale that makes the Kansas scheme look like pocket change. The words sent a chill through Lila. They'd stopped Black brought justice to their corner of Kansas, but the cancer had metastasized across the entire frontier. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "Your story, your testimony. Proof that these operations can be stopped if people are willing to fight back." Bradley's eyes burned with crusading fervor. "The Star wants to expose the whole network. We need heroes like you to show folks that ordinary people can stand up to extraordinary evil." Lila looked at Jesse, who had emerged from the barn to join them, and then at James, seeing the same grim determination in their eyes that she felt in her own heart. They'd won their battles, saved their community, brought justice to their family's killers. But justice that stopped at county lines wasn't really justice at all. "We'll tell our story," she said finally. "Every detail that might help other families recognize the warning signs, organize resistance, protect themselves. But we do it from here," James added firmly. "This is our home, our community. We're not abandoning it to chase criminals across the continent. You don't need to," Bradley assured them, scribbling notes rapidly. "Your example right here is enough. Proof that when good people stand together, even the most powerful conspiracies can be defeated." As the journalist prepared for what would clearly be a long interview, Jesse stepped closer to his sister. "You know what this means, don't you?" he said quietly. "If there are more operations like Black's, more families in danger, then they'll need to know how to fight back." Lila's voice carried the steady certainty of someone who'd learned hard lessons and was prepared to share them. "And they'll need to know they're not alone." The interview lasted until well past midnight, with Bradley documenting every aspect of their struggle against Black's conspiracy. When he finally rode away toward Kansas City, carrying their story to a wider world, Lila knew their fight had become something larger than personal vengeance or local justice. It had become a beacon for others facing similar darkness, proof that evil could be defeated when ordinary people refused to surrender their dignity, their families, or their land to those who would steal them through poison and lies. As she and James sat together on the porch in the pre-dawn darkness, watching Jesse sleep peacefully in the chair beside them, Lila felt the deep satisfaction that comes from duty fulfilled and promises kept. Her parents' sacrifice had not been in vain. Their community would endure and prosper, and their story would inspire others to stand firm against those who preyed upon the innocent. But there was one more surprise waiting for them. A letter arrived the next morning, delivered by the Territorial Mail Service, addressed to Miss Lila Benton and family. The return address showed a law firm in Boston, Massachusetts, far from Black's sphere of influence. Inside was a bank draft for $50,000, along with a letter of explanation from an attorney representing what he called concerned Eastern investors, who had been horrified to learn of their unwitting involvement in Black's conspiracy. Restitution. The letter explained, for families who suffered losses due to the fraudulent activities of Silas Black and his associates. While no amount of money can restore what was taken, we hope these funds will help rebuild what was destroyed. Similar letters, the attorney noted, were being sent to every family that had been victimized by Black's operation. The Eastern syndicate that had backed his land grab was liquidating its assets to pay for the damage they'd helped cause. Blood money, Jesse said, reading over Lila's shoulder. Justice money, she corrected. The difference is what we do with it. They used the funds to establish the Benton Foundation for Frontier Justice, an organization dedicated to helping isolated communities recognize and resist land fraud, providing legal assistance to families facing intimidation and training local lawmen to investigate suspicious patterns of illness and death. The Foundation's first case came just 3 months later, a cluster of mysterious deaths in a Colorado mining town, following the same pattern Black had used in Kansas. But this time, the victims weren't alone. They had allies' resources, and most importantly, they had hope. The frontier was still dangerous, still challenging, still filled with those who would prey upon the weak. But it was also filled with people who understood that civilization wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you built with your own hands, defended with your own courage, and passed on to the next generation as a sacred trust. Standing on her porch as another Kansas dawn painted the sky gold and crimson, Lila Benton knew that her family's story would echo across the prairie for years to come. Not as a tale of victims, but as proof that when good people stand together, even the darkest conspiracies can be brought into the light. The blood had been spilled. The deed had been voided. Justice had been served. And in the growing light of a frontier morning that was victory enough for any lifetime.